Yes, thank you very much for having me, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this conference and also particularly in this topic. I'm going to adopt a slightly more general approach in my discussion, and in the process I'd like to echo some of the comments that came from the previous discussant of the issue. Now, the presentations that the three banks gave us address very much an issue of the business model that the banks need to follow in sort of today and in the future, given the demands that are going to arise. And they've given us a few ideas on types of strategies that banks need to follow in order to simply advance and address their demands. We've seen some very impressive numbers in the ING. We saw an incredible increase in savings and current accounts, in mortgages, and all this in a period of what I would call beyond the normal. It's a period of economic animosity where, in fact, this is probably arguable that the business of banks is actually quite a difficult one. But we've seen, as also the other commentator said, we've seen a lot of encouraging issues. There's great strike to be efficient, a lot on costs, and particularly cost cutting. We've seen the importance of clients, increasing client base, expanding the balance sheet, caring very much about customer satisfaction. As a customer myself of banking services, I'm very encouraged to hear this. We've heard words like transparency and simplicity and issues of good governance. These are very good principles to be guiding any business, and certainly the business of banking. We've talked about international recognition, international standardization. And also we've heard a lot about this issue of adapting to new technology, so I think that's very encouraging, and providing services, but also payment systems that are going to satisfy the needs of a new generation, which is slightly more technologically advanced. Some very interesting issues also. I know for a fact that this issue of financial literacy that we heard from the third speaker is a very important one, and one that's going to govern the success or failure of certain financial decisions. It's a pity we didn't hear from ING on this, because I know that ING also has a very interesting project it sponsors a project on the issue of uncertainty and attitudes to debt. How does the young generation think about issuing debt, about buying houses, about financial literacy in particular? So I'm really very encouraged by the fact that banks are engaging with their clientele, and they are encouraging the issue of financial education. This is something that is both needed and is going to serve us very well as our choices on financial products expands. Now, all of this is very good, and I'd like to say that it is really up to the banks themselves, just like any other company, to decide what good performance is. That's really up to them, their business models, the way they decide that, they define it, and they execute it. But in my capacity as a discussant, I would like to urge the representatives of the banks that are here today, more broadly the sector itself, to adopt a slightly wider and more general definition of what constitutes success. And here, since we are in the session, we're talking about value not only for banks, but also value for clients, I'd like to take this a step further and argue that we need to think also about value to society. And of course, there is space for all companies to think about what it is that they contribute to society, but I think banks are particular in this respect because they are quite different and much more particular than any other sector. And the reason why I think this is because of two things. The first one is that banks, through the nature of their existence, they are the financiers of growth. This is what we call financial intermediation. They take the deposits, and through financial expertise, they transform this into investment, which might be productive investment. So this is really, if you like, the textbook definition of what banks do. That's the first one, which is particular to them. They are the ones who contribute the means, the financing for companies to be able to grow, generate jobs, and therefore welfare. The second one is that banks are systemic to the economy. Not all the banks, but a big number of banks. In the Eurozone is 129 of them, and they are now under the direct supervision of the European Central Bank. So they play a role in the society that's actually quite different to what other sectors do. And because of this very specific role that banks play, we also give bank perks. We treat them differently. How do we treat them differently? When I say we, I mean the financial architecture, those that sort of care about how banks go about their business. We provide something called deposit guaranteed systems. So these are money that the taxpayer guarantees, and therefore the banks have access to this money that other sectors do not have. That's the first perk. And the second perk, and that we have seen repeatedly in the financial crisis, we help banks out when they get into trouble, the famous bailout. There's new rules concerning bailouts, but we will continue, I'm sure, to help the financial sector if it came into that point of requiring assistance, because they play such an important role in structuring the society. So if we go back and look at how banks behaved, and now I'm talking about the sector rather than individual banks, in the past, let's say, 6, 7, 8 years, as I said, these are turbulent years, but they're important years, we actually see that banks have withdrawn from this task of financial intermediation. So banks have not really invested in new projects. And that's an important point. And there are good reasons why banks didn't do that. The first one is that they needed to clean up their balance sheets. The banks themselves have been into sort of what I call not a very healthy position. So it had been important for these banks to sort of cut back and sanitize their position. That's on one side. But on the other side, also there wasn't much demand for financial services simply because we had huge numbers of debts that at some point they will need to be serviced. So, but, moving forward, I think it's absolutely crucial that banks return back to their textbook role, which is a financial intermediation. And, how can one consider themselves as a bank, a successful bank, if they don't financially intermediate? I think that's an important thing. So what I would like to have seen a little bit more, rather than just the client base, I would like to have seen a little bit more numbers on sort of how much do we invest? What is the impact of this investment in terms of generating jobs, in terms of generating welfare? So this is an important thing, in my view, of what should constitute successful banking. And my last point is that not any investment, because we have seen huge investments prior to the crisis, but they all went into what I would now call unproductive investments, investments that did not generate enough value added to finance themselves. So I would like to sort of see banks not only invest more, but also consider the impact of their investment as something much more productive. I'll stop here. Thank you.